Okay, Melissa. CCSD, anybody else ready to put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat? Some people are still joining, I think. Okay, let's get started. First, I'd like to welcome everybody. And as you come in, put your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. So welcome to the presentation of the English Language Development Standards Framework for Science today. Just before we start, I wanted to let you know that there will be a PDF of the PowerPoint available after the webinar, and it will be recorded, as you just probably noticed. First, we're going to go through some protocols for Zoom, I believe on the next slide. So you're going to be muted as you enter, and try to stay muted unless you're unmuting to enter a discussion. You can use the chat at any time. We'll be monitoring the chat, so use the chat to ask questions and share ideas. There will be moments during the presentation when you're going to be asked to share in the chat. And then if you have a question, people will be monitoring the chat, and we'll let the presenters know. Next slide, please. So officially, I'm going to welcome everybody. I'm Rachel Laganoff with the Region 15 Comprehensive Center. The Region 15 Comprehensive Center is one of 19 federally funded regional comprehensive centers that provide capacity building, technical assistance, content expertise, and resources to state education agencies. The Region 15 CC collaborated with NDE as thought partners on this project, the whole series of the ELD Standards Framework presentations, and the one you're going to see today. Today, I'm joined by my R15 CC colleagues who are working in the background, have been helping bring this presentation to you, Julie Duffield and Delphine Kwan. If you have any tech issues, please send a chat comment to one of them. And then Ruth Sebastian will also be helping us out, and she'll be posting things in the chat for you to click on during the presentation. And it's a pleasure for us to be here today. And now I'm going to introduce our presenters for today. So the presenters for today's webinar are Sarah Owens, who's a project facilitator in Clark County School District's English Language Learners Division, serving schools in Region 3 of the district. Welcome, Sarah. And Andre De Leon, an education programs professional for K-12 science and instructional materials with the Nevada Department of Education, Office of Standards and Instructional Supports. Welcome, Andre. We also have with us today two staff members from NDE, Tina Statuki and Dr. Kulwadi Axtel, who's the Title III and Migrant Education Programs Director. And she will also be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions about the content or about the ELD Standards Framework, you can put those in the chat for Kul, and she'll be monitoring those as well. Okay, so I am now going to hand this over to Kul to get us started on the next slide.
Thank you, Rachel. So first of all, I'd just like to, it's more like a reminder and why we have, an ELD standard framework for our state, because some of you might have received, the ELD standard framework from WIDA, but our state also have, standard framework is more in-depth for our state. So again, just, this is not responsibility for just English learner specialists. So education of the English learner is for all educators that we need to be responsible for that. And then just another reason that we have it just so our English learner have access to rigorous standards-based instruction. So that was, the main purpose for that. But for today purpose, next slide, please. So then today's webinar is one of the ELD Standard Framework webinar series designed to help educators to support their English learner and other diverse learners. So the next slide, please. So before we go on, I just like to know who are here today with us. Please just check on, who you are and your role in your district or your school. So we know who you are here. Thank you. That's excellent. Oh, thank you. So we have pretty good proportion, of the classroom teacher, instructional coaches, and English learner specialists. That's a very good proportion, and we have some in the staff and other. Yeah, thank you so much for responding to the poll for that. Just with the time, because we have only an hour for the webinar, I would like to turn this over to our amazing presenters, Sarah Owens and Andre De Leon, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cool. So as far as it goes, we have our agenda for today. We're going to start with aligning our presentation to the ELD guiding principles, which are directly aligned with the NEPF.
And then we're going to connect those principles to quality learning and science, because that's what we want to do. One has something to do with the other.
And then next, we're actually going to talk about an example lesson. We're explicitly going to discuss preparing the learner and then other opportunities to interact with the text and extend the understanding.
And then we're going to make specific connections to the ELD standards, to the framework, to science learning and the science framework and standards.
And lastly, we will take questions and answers. So please, 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 please do not hesitate to ask us anything as we support you. So on the next slide, we're going to directly talk about the ELD Standard Framework and its guiding principles and how it is highly reflective and correlates to the NEPF. So on the next slide, we will sit there and see guiding principles 1 through 3. And you may be familiar with this as far as guiding principle number 1. We really want to leverage our students' assets. And with our ELL students, we really want to think about asset orientation. What are they coming with and how can we leverage that to continue to grow their language as well as their content knowledge? We also want to sit there and make sure that we are using robust grade level content standards. How do we amplify the material, not simplify it, through the use of intentional scaffolding to support our ELLs and all of our students, because all of our students are English language learners and academic language learners. And then when we have guiding principle 3, where we have that extended discourse through multiple modalities, this lesson that we'll show you today really leverages guiding principle number 3. And you'll see how we can sit there and put the learning in our students' hands so that they're able to make it visible through speaking and writing. And on the next slide, we will see guiding principles 4 and 5. So 4 is where we're building that metacognition within our students, and we're really developing autonomy. We want our students to truly take ownership of their learning, where we are acting as facilitators. And then guiding principle number 5 is that formative assessment. And what do we put in place for our students to be able to continuously, on the teacher end as well as the student end, assess their learning progress over time. Next slide, please.
And then we connect those principles to quality learning and science, where we have where we focus on you see the dimensions listed on the left-hand side, and then the characteristics on the right-hand side. I'll go through those briefly. Conceptual focus, where you have a deep understanding of the concept. It goes beyond the surface level. And then you have participation by design, where you engage students purposefully in order to engage in robust grade level tasks that are sustained through discourse. A lot of times you'll hear the word argument in using science, because that was kind of the thinking early on, but it's actually discourse, where there's an exchange of ideas and a listening to of each other's ideas, as opposed to which idea wins out. And then we'll have a purposeful focus on language. And you'll notice that this is ordered purposefully, unintended, because the idea is that you don't want the language to step on the learning of the science concept. A lot of times we shut down students in the learning of science because they don't express it language-wise correctly. And so we want to have those purposeful steps so we have quality learning of science. Next slide, please. So then it goes to that process of learning lesson planning. And you'll see these listed here. They're listed here in alphabetical order, but they're to be done simultaneously, not in this order. So you want that, you want to create those activities that will enable students to apply their understanding in a way that they can demonstrate their knowledge. And then you want to provide as many opportunities as possible for students to activate their knowledge so that they can kind of be co-pilots or co-constructors of that language, using their language to express the idea, and then also learning the science language that expresses those ideas. And then you read and analyze the key concepts together and provide the necessary language practices to provide that bridge so that students can go from the language they express science concept in to the actual science content language. Next slide, please. And so what I kind of alluded to is that scaffolding. So you see those same, you see those same lesson planning practices on the left. And then in order to provide those students that bridge that I alluded to before, you have scaffolds that sort of students serve at, it's not all just on the teacher to do this. Students have that critical friend that can listen to the student, listen to their classmate express the ideas, and then kind of coach them, critique them, guide them to the learning of the language, the science language. And this is very important because it's not just parent, turn and talk where you're just blah, 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 and then the other person goes blah, blah, blah. No, you have to be that critical friend so that you listen and the students can enable each other. You teach through learning and you learn through teaching. And so students get the opportunity to do that. And then you provide those structures for interaction and provide that time too. So, and then you also, you provide focused choices and guidance around the, so students can express their ideas and practices. Next slide, please. So here's the science standard that we're going to use front and center. This is the middle school standard for physical science 2-1. Apply Newton's law to design a solution to solve a problem involving the collision of two objects. And I'll have now Sierra will kind of talk you through how the ELD folds into this.
Thank you. So as far as this goes, we know that science is way more than just a lab or an activity or a task that students do. Science is all around us. And so we want our students to truly be speaking and writing like scientists. And the way that we can do this is we can sit there and as Andre said, we want to say argumentative writing, but it's really that dialogue, that discourse. And in the terms of science, and when we think about a formal essay, we think about our CER, our claim, evidence, and reasoning. So it's not what our students know, but it's what they're able to prove and what they're able to defend. And so through our series of tasks and structures, we are going to build our students up to be able to write a CER or a formal essay on an open topic using specific structures as well as sources to meet the criteria. And then the next thing that we would want to sit there for our students to do is to be able to have alternative audience and be able to change the format and the language to meet the needs of the new audience so that they're able to, once again, prove their stance on a topic. And then lastly, as an extension activity, we would discuss actually doing a Socratic seminar where our students will review the process as well as the skills and language for argumentative writing through the use of speech. Next slide, please. So our students, what is the subgroup that we're working with for this particular lesson? We're gonna do our grades 6 through 8, our middle school babies, my personal favorites that I love to work with. And they come with a wide range of knowledge and skills from argumentative thinking and writing and that background knowledge of force and interactions. Remember, none of our students are coming in as blank slates. They have assets that we can leverage in order to continue our concepts and develop that language and content simultaneously. And then as we know, in a grade 6 through 8, we have our long-term ELs, and they typically fall in that proficiency level between 3 and 4. These are our students that are able to socially speak. And so we assume, why are they designated ELL? They speak English. But when it comes down to that actual academic speech, they do not have necessarily all the skills, or they're able to demonstrate those skills necessary in order to exit the WIDA exam. Next slide, please. So when we show you this lesson, I know people say all the time, that sounds good, Sierra and Andre, you guys can do this, but what are our kids really doing? What do we already have in place? So this is what we have. Our students already know the instructional routines and procedures for effective academic discourse. So they have experienced different things. We have done round robin. We have done more than a turn and talk. We've done think, pair, share. We've used clarifying bookmarks, different things of that nature. So they know exactly what the expectations are for the classroom for them to actually be able to speak. They have their critical friendships or their small groups. I love that word. Andre introduced me to that. We always think about the dyads of how we're able to co-construct meaning with each other. And so they understand that they need to leverage each other in order to fully understand the concepts and the ideas that are going on. And they've also been, once again, explicitly taught discourse strategies such as paraphrasing, clarifying, supporting, and building on ideas in small group discussions. This is not the first time that they've done anything of that nature. And they've also participated in Socratic seminars about 2 to 3 times prior to this lesson. The one thing that we want to sit there and say, any new structure that you introduce, such as a clarifying bookmark, a think, pair, share, a Socratic seminar, the initial time that you do it, or the first few times that you do it, you want to do it with a topic that is lighthearted and high student interest. And the reason why you want to do that is that it lowers the stress of the students. They're not learning a new concept and a new task simultaneously. You want them to be able to truly get down the routines and procedures of the tasks that you want them to do. And then you add in the new concepts or the scientific standards that you would want them to know. Kind of thinking about like walking and chewing gum at the same time. We want to sit there and allow them to be able to learn things at different pieces. Next slide, please. And the purpose of the Socratic seminar, the overall goal is not to debate. Debates are fun, and we know that they can be a good time, but we want our students to truly be able to engage in dialogue that allows them to co-construct meaning of the concepts together. And as they do this, in order to prepare, they will have mini lectures. They will have different readings of text and annotations that will support their stances on either side. And when we sit there and talk about the purpose and the lesson overall, is to review their language and skills and the process of argumented writing, and to provide our students the necessary scaffolds for them to actually write their CER in the case of science, which once again is our claim, evidence, and reasoning. So we're going to do a quick poll. How familiar are you with the Socratic seminar? So are you not at all familiar? Are you a little bit familiar, moderately familiar, or very familiar? Okay. So moderately familiar, very well. So as far as it goes, similar to the makeup in the room, it's kind of evenly distributed a bit. So you guys are all being able to come off and learn some new things with us. In the chat, talk to me. If you are familiar with it, how have you used the Socratic seminar to develop language? Or how have you seen it be used inside of a classroom? And this is where we get to practice our wait time as educators, as you have the ability to type. So once again, how have you used the Socratic seminar or seen it be used to help students develop language? All right. Tina said as an English teacher, she used it to discuss the content. Ooh, they implement this in all of their classes. Students are taught to lead the discussion while teachers are guiding what is needed. This offers that critical thinking space. And they do it in math, science, English. I would love to see a math Socratic seminar. That's one thing I've not seen. They have training each year for teachers. That is powerful. Teaching the students how to truly facilitate that conversation and co-construct meaning. I would love to see a math one. I'm still stuck on that. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall. I think that that would be absolutely amazing. We'll give you about 30 more seconds to share with us. How have you used the Socratic seminar, or have you seen it be used? Thank you. I'm going to take you up on that, Rachel, for sure. I'm going to have to scroll back up and see where you are, because that would be so powerful. Founder Classical Academy. Where is that? That must not be in Clark County.
It's probably easier just to talk it. We're here in Las Vegas. We're right off of Rancho and Alexander. So we're a BCSI school, and our curriculum is supported by Hillsdale College in Michigan. So we're very big on teacher-led instruction, Socratic seminars, etc.
You just made my entire day. So don't worry. Make sure we exchange emails because I would love to see this.
Absolutely. Even in our special education department and with our English language learners, we take time out to practice how it should look and get them comfortable with it as well. So they get a little extra practice, but anytime we'll exchange emails. You got it.
Definitely. Thank you. I'm going to be the person you can't get rid of for that. Thank you all so much for sharing. This is exciting. As far as it goes on the next slide, we're actually going to sit there and actually get into our lesson sequence and what it looks like. And remember, what we're going to do is we're going to explicitly show you the examples for preparing the learner, where we're activating our students' prior knowledge and we're trying to highlight concepts that are going to be developed. And then Andre and I are going to talk you through the remaining tasks that you can do. We only had an hour. We wish we could have took you through all of it for sure. Next slide, please. So the first task that we're going to start with is 4 corners. 4 corners is something that you may have done often inside of your classroom, as far as where you would have a prompt or a question or something that students would need to truly grapple with. And they would have corners A, B, C, and D literally around the room, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is also something that can be promoted through listening and verbal and written communication. It builds on your critical thinking as well as decision making, and it can be used with a variety of subjects. And once again, as it works, the students are presented with a question, and then they're expected to express their opinion or response by commenting on one of the 4 corners. And inside the corner, they need to discuss the reason why. So even though we all may be in corner 1, we may be all in corner 1 for different reasons. And then, of course, then you would do an additional share out where students would sit there and share their corners, basically consensus as to why they are there and the reasons. And then we would continue to build on the idea. It's a great way to do a quick formative assessment to see where your students are. And it can be done face-to-face or virtually, because on the next slide, we'll actually show you something that is actually done. So this actually comes from the Uncovering Student Ideas in Physical Science. And when I was still in the science classroom, I actually just ran off the worksheet off at first and had the students do it. That took away the actual discourse that our students could actually have. And so by placing it in a 4 corners format, or through a 4 corners task, you can increase the number of voices in the room, and students are truly able to co-construct meaning with each other versus just having that discussion, with themselves in the paper and then hearing from a few students outside. So it says, Inya, Reed, Chris, and Roberto were sitting in the car. The car suddenly went around a sharp corner. After the car came out of the turn, they wondered about the forces involved. This is what they said. Inya, wow, did you feel the force pushing us outward? I was pushed against the passenger door. Reed said, I don't think we were pushed outward. I think we were pushed inward. Otherwise, we wouldn't be turning. Chris said, I could only feel the force pushing us forward. The force must be in the direction because this is the direction we are moving. And Roberto said, actually, when you started to turn, I think we slowed down a bit. So I think I felt a push backwards. With whom do you agree? And so the way that we made this actually into an interactive virtual task is we use Jamboard, which is made by Google. It's a part of the Google Suite. And hopefully we'll be able to show it to you. Otherwise, I know we'll be able to put the link in the chat. And the way that the Jamboard works is that every slide would have a different version of the response of Inya, Reed, Chris, or Roberto. And the students would need to say with whom did they agree with and why. All right, so they need to be able to sit there and justify that information. As far as what makes this task so powerful is that students are already being introduced to the word force. You see it shows up multiple times because that is a key vocabulary term that students would need to know and be able to utilize in order to explain their understanding of the concepts. The next thing that we would sit there and do so that our students are actually having that sustained and reciprocal discourse is that we would actually designate a specific sticky note on the Jamboard for students to be able to respond to each other. And so they would sit there and be able to say, I agree, because, and continue to build on each other's ideas or even challenge each other's thinking and feel comfortable enough to do so throughout the process. And the Jamboard link is in the chat. That's amazing. So take some time to go ahead and open that up. as you wish, or save it so that you can sit there and see how this could be set up for our students to be able to interact. Now, you wouldn't want your students to do only one task to prepare the learner. We want to get them high interest. And the reason why this works is that every student who has been in a car or been on a bus, or if they rode a bicycle, something that they're able to connect to and anchor to as they go through the material. So the next preparing the learner on the next slide, Andre is going to talk you through.
Right. So now here's where the rubber meets the road. And we're going to start with centering a task that that kind of puts it into a real world type context. I'm going to drop the standard into the chat as I go through this task. So which theme do you feel is the biggest reason why the NIAA does not provide top-notch equipment for all their activities? We have some activities listed there. Football, soccer, softball. There is more than that, but we just kind of put students going. And so there are the responses there. They could answer one for moral complexity. The existence of social inequality is 2, laws and codes 3, or other, where they can identify as specifically as possible to engage in the conversation. And so in the chat, go ahead and answer that question. Oh, that's right. Sorry. In the Padlet. I messed this up in rehearsal too, so bear with me.
Got you, Andre. Don't worry. Before we do that, when we do this task, we actually, once again, we wanted to sit there and make sure we increased the number of voices in the room. So we have the response in the Padlet, so you can sit there and answer the question, as Andre said. Which one do you feel like it aligns to?
Go ahead and put your answers in the Padlet. And for those you don't, I did put the standard in the chat so that you can refer back to it to center your thought thinking. Go about 30 more seconds. All right, so then we would use, however this is, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the Padlet right now, so I'll ask people to give voice to what they said in Padlet into the room, but we would use this Padlet to start the conversation on which, and again, this is not a debate. There's no right answer here. This exercise is done to engage in thought around the standard. So, you know, somebody want to kind of unmute and just say what they said on Padlet. Now, we can't have that long teacher wait time.
We could, Andre, we could also show the Padlet if you'd like.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, so Delphine, go ahead and show the Padlet. Thank you.
So I see about 4 answers for the existence of social inequality and a number of others, not enough money, cost sponsorships, and attendance at the events. That's an interesting one. Somebody want to give voice to that attendance at the events? And I'm modeling something that you would do in your classroom, and you wouldn't sit here waiting for the student. I'm asking because that's the one that didn't even occur to me. All right, well, we'll let that sit silent. But so this is how you would start a conversation that I know will work much better in your classroom, because we're not doing this with teachers who've had very long days and now sitting through an hour webinar. But the idea is that you do this so that the students don't look at you to provide that right answer, but to engage that conversation. And then also the other question you would throw out is, so what question do you see, what connection do you see between this task and the science standard that I dropped into the chat? You could put those responses in the chat, because I'd love to see those.
You got a great question, Andre, in the chat that we were expecting to see. That's because Ruth posted it. As far as how does this task align with the science standard? And does it align? I love white time on webinars. It's even better than in person, because sometimes we can see people's faces, sometimes we can't.
Remember, any answer is okay, because every answer it furthers conversation, which is exactly what science is supposed to do. All right, I see in the chat, there must be several forces reacting to each other to cause there not to be top-notch equipment. All right. Is the equipment chosen that will, is it, I'm stumbling over this. I'm thinking that this is saying, is the equipment that is chosen, will it really protect the players? Am I capturing that question correctly? All right. Hey, all right. I'm pretty good at the end of the day. And that's a great question. And it kind of ties into that moral complexity, right? Because, you know, we put out protective equipment a lot of times, and a lot of times it's not as protective as it should be. I'll call out football as a prime example of this. And the helmet technology. My son plays football, so I coach football, so it's a subject near and dear to me for many reasons. All right. Any other thoughts before we move this conversation and exercise further? So before we move on to the next slide, I just want to share something that happened in our discussion of this. So when I suggested this as an exercise, Cool and my dear friend Sophia, who's not on the conversation today, both reached out and in a very nice way said, what the heck are you talking about? And what is this, a different lesson? We didn't talk about a different lesson. And then I said, well, no, I see a connection here. And we talked through what that connection was. And it had something to do with something I saw on the Padlet, where somebody responded something to the effect of all the different forces that act upon objects, and also the participants themselves during the course of a given NIAA event. And so one of the things in the choosing of those 5 sports you see in parentheses is that was done purposeful. Even though they're in alphabetical order, those are the top 5 sports NIAA activities that cause the most injuries among their participants due to those forces that a number of you alluded to. And so when you drop that knowledge on your students, because I'm pretty sure that when they see this, because you're going to go and take this lesson right to your classrooms, they're going to say, I don't see the connection between this. And then you get to kind of walk them through and kind of articulate that connection, and you do it kind of like in, you don't want to give away the whole movie at the all at the same time, but you start talking about it incrementally so that they can start making the connections for themselves. I hope that makes sense to everybody. All right, next slide, please.
All right, so what Andre was talking about was anchoring our student in a phenomenon, latching them in, getting them interested in the concepts that we're going to overall develop. So when we're talking about connecting to prior knowledge or preparing our learner for the concepts that we're going to do as we build language and content simultaneously, for our English language learners, what prior knowledge or lived experiences may they bring to the table overall? So in the chat, go ahead and let us know. What prior knowledge or lived experiences may they bring to our classrooms and to our schools? Because remember that there are babies, and yes, we're teaching them different things, but they're not blank slates. So Tina says different climates, cultures. Their life experiences overall, personal experiences and cultures. They have stronger cultural connections, travel experiences, family structures, dynamics. Yes.
I like the travel experiences, bringing that in, because it assumes that students go out and see the world. A lot of times we just assume that the students come to our classrooms and then go back home and then come back again. No, they do go out, they do travel, they do go see the world, and we should lift them up for doing that, and support them doing that and give them credit for doing that.
I thought they lived their lives. I thought only teachers just taught and went home.
Yeah, definitely.
And Amy said the traditions. So as far as it goes, there's so much that we can sit there and think about. So by getting to know your students and their prior knowledge and their funds of knowledge or their assets that bring to the classroom, you can really leverage it so that they are interested in the concepts that we're ultimately going to develop. Thank you so much for engaging with me in the chat. Next slide, please. So one way they can also activate prior knowledge is to think, pair, share. And this is something that we have done across the board for many, many moons, but it's a structure that works and it's very strong. And how it happens is that the students think about their prompts and they write an individual response. So that gives that student that opportunity to think here and then make connection and have that dialogue with that paper individually so that they're able to collect their thoughts prior to hearing from anyone else. And the reason why this is powerful is because oftentimes we throw out a prompt and we have our one or two kids that are quick to sit there and raise their hand, and it shuts down the ideas of the other students in the classroom. And so by giving the students that time and having it built in that first think and then individually write, it allows every single student to know that their thoughts are valued and that they have a place. The next thing you can the next thing, a part of the structure, is to pair. And you pair them with their critical friend or their partner or their dyad and have them exchange ideas so that they're able to sit there and co-construct meanings with each other. And then the next step would be sharing out with the whole class what your partner said. And that is absolutely crucial because that means that we're teaching our students active listening. I don't know about you because I find myself doing it sometimes. Even when people are sharing, I'm too busy thinking about what I'm going to say next that I'm not fully engaged and invested in what my partner is saying. So making sure that your students know from the beginning that the expectation that you're going to share what your partner said, it makes them those active listeners. And someone will thank them for it a million years down the road. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so the next step of doing a think, pair, share is doing a think, pair, share squared. And this is where you have your students be able to co-construct meaning with even more critical friends. So the way that it works is that you would do the first step of think. Once again, give your students the time to think. Then they would be able to individually write their thoughts and ideas of your answer to the prompt. Then they will pair with their one critical friend, that exchange of ideas. And then this was what makes think, pair, share squared different, is now they will join with another dyad in order to form a group of 4. And then they would share what their partners said with each other, so that we're increasing the number of voices that they hear before we get to the whole group share out. Think, Pair, Share Squared is a wonderful resource, wonderful task for our students to use in order to share ideas. Next slide, please. So this dialogue guide may be something that you're familiar with, and you may have seen it be called a dialogue guide or a clarifying bookmark, or it could be student moves. And this is basically giving your students that scaffold for them to decide, one, what they can do, and that is either share their claim, refute potential counterclaims, build on the claim of others, respectfully disagree, which is a wonderful, wonderful, powerful tool, as well as refer to a resource. And then the second column allows them to know what they can say. And this gives your students multiple ways for them to be able to respond as they are interacting, either in their pairs or in their inside of their groups of 4, in whole group, or specifically in our Socratic seminar. Now, you wouldn't throw this whole dialogue guide to your students all at once. They'll get overwhelmed and they'll be like, okay, well, I really don't know what to say now. And because it takes them a little bit to sit there and decide, how am I going to respond? You may want to start off by just practicing, how can we share our claims? And practicing that for a few days or a week, and then adding on, let's refute our potential counterclaims. Then adding on, building on the ideas of others. Just like anything with our ELLs and all of our students, because all of our students are academic language learners, it's important to know that chunking is powerful. So that's how I would introduce the dialogue guide. Next slide, please. So as we said in the beginning, we're not going to take you through, we showed you explicitly the 2 examples of how we would sit there and prepare the learner, and explicitly the task, think, pair, share, and think, pair, share squared that you can do with your students. But now we're going to talk about other things that we would have included throughout our lesson for our students. So I'm going to do the first 2, and then Andre will knock out the second 2. So when it comes down to 4 corners, it activates that prior knowledge of scientific concepts. It also activates that prior knowledge of that social emotional aspects of the Socratic seminar topic. And it anchors in that phenomenon. It gives your students something to latch onto as we go into our lesson. Then we have our think, pair, share squared. And this allows our students to co-construct meaning of context with their critical friends. Again, I still love that word, critical friends. And as far as it goes, this gets very powerful. We need to think about, what do we put in place in our classroom where our students are doing much of the talking, because we know whoever's doing most of the talking is doing most of the learning.
And then you come with a mini lecture, emphasis on mini, because you want to provide that foundational scientific knowledge, but do it in such a way that it doesn't step on how students articulate their own knowledge around science. And this is where this is the opportunity to center these conversations around the NVEX and Nevada Academic Content Standards for Science. And then that Socratic seminar, again, that's to apply that new knowledge to different situations for the purpose of problem solving, and to demonstrate the understanding through that use of language. And remember, this is still not a contest. Everybody wins in a Socratic seminar because everybody learns in a Socratic seminar. And as you look through these activities from 4 corners all the way to the Socratic seminar, this is science, and this is how science is learned. Because the thing is, the 4 corners activities provides that engagement to its students to bring in their own knowledge. That's phenomenon right there. And then the think, pair, share squared, that is that discourse that we talked about. The mini lecture, that's where we bring in the standards and make those connections for students, as well as the critical friend. Remember, it's not just the teacher making these connections, the critical friend helps make those connections with the students also. And then that Socratic seminar is everybody talking about their ideas so that other people can learn about the ideas. I'm looking at a question in the chat. So we have a question in the chat. How does Socratic seminar work? And do you have a description for this? I'm looking at our expert. I'll start us off, and then Ciara, why don't you go in and knock it out of the park. And that's a great question, because not everybody, I'm glad you dropped that in there, because Socratic seminar is when you bring students together with preparation, so that preparation takes place through the activities that we talked about: 4 corners, think, pair, share, square. You don't drop Socratic seminar cold on them. And Ciara kind of alluded to this early on, that you do this with topics and areas of student interest so they could have that comfort. But once you basically provide students many opportunities to be successful in the Socratic seminar, the way it's set up is that I've seen it done in a circle. I've seen it done on the stairs in front of the school. I've seen it done in a lot of places. But the idea is you get the students comfortable, and then you get the students talking about, using our lesson as an example, how they responded to the question that I had posed earlier about the reasons why NIAA doesn't provide safety equipment for all the students who participate in NIAA activities. And one of the things that I've seen that makes Socratic seminar work is that students, the reason why I'm kind of, I wouldn't advise in sitting the students in a circle and just having students talk, is because then it kind of puts them on the spot to have to participate. And then it kind of turns it into that, oh, I have nothing to say, or I want to make everybody understand my idea. You want to create the best opportunity for students to express their ideas and then listen to each other's ideas. Ciara, what am I missing?
So as Andre said, there's various ways that you can do it, and he's seen it on the stairs, he's seen it in the classroom. The way that I traditionally do it is we have the inside and outside circle. And so the inside circle, kind of like a fishbowl, the inside circle are the ones that are speaking, and they're the ones that are actually having the actual discourse, and they defend a side for whatever the case may be. And then the outside circle, they're not just watching, because they're still active participants, because every single person participating in the Socratic seminar actually are engaging and interacting with each other. And so as far as it goes, the outside circle can pass in different questions or different points to people in the inside circle so that they could sit there and speak. And then at times you could sit there and also reverse it, where some people are inside the inside circle for a little while, and then you sit there and pass it on as far as, once you've spoken 2 times or different things of that nature, so that one person is not fully dominating the conversation. Amy, we can also send you, if you drop your link in the chat, we can actually send you a few slides that actually outlines exactly how you can sit there and put a Socratic seminar in place, so that we can make sure to support you so that you can actually implement it inside of your classroom or your school. Does that sound good? I hope that's a yes. Just for the sake of time, we want to make sure that we respect your guys' time. And so we'll sit there and break down all of that for you. So maybe have the next slide, please. All right, so this is where we want to sit there and talk about how do these activities or tasks or structures that we implemented or talked about support meaningful discourse. So look back to one of the activities that we sit there and talked about, where it could be the 4 corners. It could be that think, ink, pair, share, squared, or the Socratic seminar. How can that support meaningful discourse? And how does it sit there and align directly with our guiding principle number 3, which is that extended discourse through multiple modalities? So go ahead and put that in the chat. How do these activities support meaningful discourse? They're purposeful, engaged discussions. Yes, they provide structures so students are able to participate no matter their level. Yes. Think, pair, share, squared. It provides students opportunities. Starts with the structure to allow them to think prior to sharing with a student partner and then a small group. Yes, builds confidence. Yes.
The theme with...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the theme with the chat is support. You're supporting the students in order to engage in this process. And that is great. It's great seeing these comments in the chat.
All the way. I completely agree. Encouraged participation builds confidence. Yes. It builds that expectation and that invitation for discourse inside the classroom through that supported structure. Very well. Thank you all. Next slide, please. This is time for questions. And we actually left some time for you to really continue to ask questions. And once again, we'll make sure that we send out some slides regarding how to actually do a Socratic seminar to support that, because that could be an hour-long PD in itself, at least. Are there any other questions? All right, if you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat. Andre or I will make sure to highlight them and support you with that throughout the presentation. May we have our next slide, please? All right, so our ELD Standard Framework, it is very powerful. It's a document. Once again, yes, the WIDA has their ELD Standards Framework, but this is based off of Nevada, and it's for our content areas, ELA, social studies, math, and science. And it's also broken down into our actual grade bands. And so it makes it very supported and very aligned to your content standards, as well as the language development needs of our students. Next slide, please. So specifically, we're going to talk about the ELD Standards Framework for Developing the Language of Science, grades 6 through 8. Next slide, please. So the framework is divided up into 3 parts. So part 1 is that purpose. Why do we have the ELD Standards Framework? It also talks about the key uses of academic language for our ELL students and all of our students, and how it is basically set up. Section 2 of the ELD Standard Frameworks gives us those generic supports of student moves and teacher moves based off of our content area. And then section 3 is where the magic happens. This is where it's aligned directly with your disciplinary practices of your content area. So what that means is for science, and for today's particular case, we know that we have 8 disciplinary practices. Next slide, please. So when we sit there and look at section 2 has 2A, which is the language use expectation. So what language are we expecting our students to use? What academic vocabulary do we expect them to see? How do we expect them to interact? Then 2B talks about the teacher moves. What supports can we put in place for our students to process and produce language? And then 2C talks about the teacher moves. How can we support for collaboration in the academic language? And once again, these are just going to be general supports that we could use across the board for science. Next slide, please. So this is an example of 2A, so student moves for receptive listening. So we'll sit there and see that in the case of our students that we're talking about for this lesson, they're in that developing, expanding, or those levels 3, 4. So we could sit there and expect our students for listening and reading to be able to identify examples of scientific tools, to compare and contrast examples of scientific tools, or provide sequence and identify cycles or processes for descriptive paragraphs and from descriptive paragraphs and diagrams. So it allows us to sit there and see what exactly can we expect them to do with the receptive side of language. Next slide, please. And then on the productive side of language is speaking and writing. What student moves can we expect? So for our students, once again, our levels 3, 4, we can expect them to compare and contrast scientific discoveries, and utilizing the sentence frame, blank is similar to blank or different from blank because, giving that why, justifying the answer. Remember, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. They can imagine future scientific inventions or discoveries based on oral and visual clues, as well as compare and contrast 2 forms of energy or things of that nature, and be able to explain the use of different forms of energy using the frame, blank is used to blank. Next slide, please. And so when we have the section 2B, these are our teacher moves as far as how can we support for processing and producing language. This is a little small, but as you can see in the chat, you have the link for all of the science standards, ELD standard frameworks that you'll be able to peruse through to know what you can put in place, such as providing different scaffolding supports, or using the KWL chart, or using sentence frames for responses of open-ended questions. Next slide, please. And then when we think about how students can collaborate for academic language, so you can sit there and know that we can put in place for our students to engage in pair work. We can engage in whole or large group discussions, such as the Socratic seminar. We can have them use think, pair, share as examples of supports that we can put in place for our students to use academic language as they collaborate with their peers. Next slide, please. So as we look back, and we're going to go through this kind of quickly because we're down to 3 minutes and we want to make sure we respect your time. We think about the teacher moves and the students moves that go through. So Andre, go ahead and talk about some of the teacher moves.
So I just, I'll let you read it and then I'll just say very quickly, in summary, in about a couple of sentences, the idea is to validate students' acts in learning and their expression of phenomenon and through their experience and expression. And then you provide the language. It's almost kind of like you engage in the activity and then you provide the and listen to the language in there to express it, and then provide those language supports to bridge them towards the scientific language almost after the fact. So it doesn't step on their access to phenomenon and their experiences. How did I do?
You did really well, my friend. And as you can see with our student moves, we just want to make sure our students are utilizing their vocabulary.
Next slide, please.
So as far as it goes, and we're not going to spend too much time on this, we just want you to really think about how does the sequence of activities provide our English learners with opportunities to engage strategically, and what additional supports might they need. So just think about that. Like if you implemented these things in your classroom based off of your students and your population, what additional supports might you need to put in place for them to do a think, pair, share, a Socratic seminar, 4 corners, or different things of that nature. Next slide, please. And so once again, we talk about this is where the magic happens. And the reason why we just want to highlight this briefly is to know that the question that we ask in this standard directly aligns with practice 7, which is engaging in argument from evidence. So we want our students to be able to support their thoughts. And so as we go through, we would sit there and see teacher moves. They would provide language frames for them to be able to compare and critique. You would make sure that they have different ways and different scaffolds for them to be able to make their claims and their arguments throughout their learning. Next slide, please. And student success criteria. If you do not share student success criteria with your students already, I think that it is highly something you should start to do, because it allows your students to know, how will I know when I actually have achieved or mastered this concept or this standard? And so you'll see across the board that the student success criteria is the same. However, what support that is provided to our students change based off of their proficiency levels. Next slide, please. So as we sit there and we wrap up, do we have any last minute questions? And once again, if so, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to address them.
Dropped a great book that I came across fairly recently in the chat, Science in the City, culturally relevant STEM education in the classroom on science. It's a great read, and it talks about that phenomena engagement and language moves that we.
Now we're going to pass it off to Cool.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Andre. That was wonderful. For the next slide, it does our contact here. If you have any question that you can bring up later, just send that to me. Unfortunately, my colleague, Sophia Masavich, this is her last day, sadly for me. So yeah, send any question. If I don't know, I will reach out to an expert and find that answer for you. And also I would like to remind you that we have the last webinar focused on social study 2 weeks from today at the same time, May 13th. So please sign up or let your colleague know. That will be our last webinar. So I will turn it to my colleague Rachel to do the closing and announce the survey for the participant. Again, thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you everybody for attending and staying to the last minute. We'd really appreciate you taking a survey. This helps our wonderful presenters to know what went well, what they can improve on next time. It helps us with the entire series to know what's working for you and what we in the R15CC working with NDE can do to improve the resources that we provide for you in the future. So please do take the survey. And the link should be in the chat. Ruth, if you can just post it again. And the next webinar series is on the ELD Standards Framework in Social Studies. And I hope you all join me in thanking our presenters, Sierra and Andre, today for connecting the ELD Standards Framework to science instruction. So thank you, everybody.